Good evening. This is the India Development Debate. I'm Taneia Bhardwaj coming to you live from our Mumbai News studios. And straight on then to our first debate for the evening. The IL&FS crisis that's continuing to make headlines, even as the government-appointed board of directors prepares to meet for the first time tomorrow. Now, government sources indicate that the board, headed by veteran banker Uday Kotak, is likely to meet in Mumbai and submit a preliminary report in the next 5 days. The Serious Fraud Office, the SFIO, probing into the charges of mismanagement and fund siphoning, is also expected to file its findings within a month. The immediate focus is on paying off the company's immediate debt obligations after a series of defaults triggered panic in the market. Pressure is also mounting on the former directors of IL&FS, with many questioning their continuation on the boards of other companies. So, what are the immediate priorities for Uday Kotak and Company? What are the lessons from the IL&FS crisis? And more importantly, how can we prevent such scams from recurring? The IL&FS crisis and its fallout on financial markets is what we're discussing this evening on the India Development Debate. And for that, let me cross over to our guests this evening. Joining in on the show, Shailesh Haribhakti, Chairman of Haribhakti and Company, founder of FinSec Law Advisors. Sandeep Parekh joins in. So does Prabal Basu, who is a Sloan Fellow of London Business School, Management Advisor and a former Corporate Director. And the Economic Times resident editor, R. Sriram, is here with us as well. Gentlemen, a good evening to each one of you, and thank you so much for sparing the time. Let me get straight to it, and I'll come to you, Mr. Haribhakti, first. The Uday Kotak board meeting tomorrow in Mumbai. What do you think should their immediate priorities be?
They must decide what is the strategic thrust that they want to give to this set of enterprises. They have to decide whether this is an infrastructure development company, which is in the business of actually executing road and power and other projects, or is it a pure financing company? Based on that, they will have to take actions to dovetail the structure, which should always follow the strategy which is chosen. They must focus their mind and attention on what will work, what will make sure that the enterprise can continue in a sustainable manner, choose their right to win in the areas that they choose to stay in, and then execute to a plan which will enable them to meet obligations on time and refinance and rework the entire structure that IL&FS now represents.
That's a whole lot to do. Sandeep, let's sort of talk about, some of the nitty-gritties. Asset sale is one option that's being discussed as part of the revival plan. Now, how easy and effective is it going to be, considering the diverse businesses of IL&FS? And I think we all know that the company has tried to do this in the past with almost no success.
Is that for me? Is that for me?
Yes, Sandeep, that's for you.
Yeah. So, I think, there are two very separate issues at hand. One is solvency and the other is liquidity. I think it's very intrinsic nature of an infrastructure financing company that there is an asset liability mismatch, because you always lend for 10, 20 or even 30 years. Some of the toll roads, the benefits go up to 50 years. So, you have assets which are very, very long duration, and you have liabilities which are rarely available beyond 1 year, 3 years or 5 years. So, the industry itself is kind of always cries for liquidity if there is any stress, and you can bet there is a lot of stress in IL&FS. So, they will have to figure in terms of the next 1 year or 2 years what is the cash flows which are required, and naturally, a sale which is going to be a fire sale is going to not generate the kind of returns which would be able to satisfy all the debt holders. So, they will have to figure out how to prioritize the ones which cause the repayments of whatever is due in the next 6 months or 8 months or 1 year, and then have a much more sustained, slow and international bidding of the assets which IL&FS has, because selling a 30-year an asset which has a 30-year payback should be very thoughtful, should invite the largest number of players from all over the world, not just India, for it to actually bring out returns which are commensurate with the true value of that asset.
Right. Mr. Roy, let me ask you, as Sandeep is also saying, the asset monetization will perhaps take time, and in immediate, areas, there are short-term obligations that need to be met. One option, one would imagine, is to tap existing shareholders, maybe put in place a debt moratorium to delay payments. What are some of the workable solutions you think the board can adopt?
Well, as far as this specific aspect is concerned, I mean, the most obvious one is essentially to use the government to match the cash flows. And essentially what that means is to, make sure that the receivables from the government come in much, much faster now, because there have been roadblocks in that. And the payables to the government are suitably restructured. That is the low-hanging fruit which can work, since the government is standing behind with the liquidity option for the organization. That would be, I think, on an immediate basis. Apart from that, of course, I have mentioned this in some other, in an article which I had written. I think we should also look at other government vehicles like the NIIF, for example, which is actually scouting for assets, long-term assets. And if that is a deal which can be done for some part of the assets of IL&FS, that would be a win-win for all. And the government and the Abu Dhabi Investment Authority is a shareholder in NIIF as well as in IL&FS. So that is something which can work pretty well, actually, in case it is pushed in that direction. So these two can give immediate liquidity, I would think.
Sriram, I want you to sort of step back and give us the larger picture. Do you think that the government has acted in time to prevent a contagion effect on the financial system?
Well, you could argue that they could have acted a little bit earlier. You could argue that they could have done this sometime in September probably, and not wait till the first week of October to do this. But I think given the circumstances and given the complex issues involved, they did act in the nick of time to actually prevent this from spilling over into a major contagion that would have, because let's not forget that for the few weeks in September, the credit markets were very worried. Investors were very worried. Mutual funds didn't know whether they were, whether investors would redeem their money or not. And there was a lot of fear, panic, uncertainty. I think given the circumstances, there were only two things that could have happened. There could have been a very, very decisive vote that would have happened at the AGM last Saturday, with the shareholders deciding in unequivocal terms that yes, we are going to back this company and we are going to put in money. But unfortunately, that didn't happen. There was the AGM was not a very, very smooth, pleasant affair. It was a bit of an acrimonious affair. There were a lot of tough questions asked to the management, which is only fair. I mean, the management should have been asked tough questions. And once the government realized that things were not working according to plan, and the management was staying, and the shareholders were not happy with the management, they really didn't have a choice. They had to bite the bullet. They had to come in with the artillery, come in with the heavy cavalry, which they did. Yeah, you could have argued that, well, they could have done this 10-15 days earlier, but I think they were waiting for the shareholders meet. They wanted to know what the shareholders thought, and whether the shareholders had actually forced the issue, and whether the management would on its own resign and step aside and let a new set of board members and managerial personnel take over. But once that didn't happen, the die was cast and the government had to come in, which they did.
Sandeep, let me ask you, do you believe that IL&FS should go through the insolvency process like any other private company, or would you argue that there's just too much at stake? Was superseding the board then the best way the government could have prevented a contagion effect?
I think if you see the reconstitution of the board, it shows that the government is concerned about contagion, and I think that cat has left the bag. So I think the contagion has already spread. We've had widespread spreading of this disease caused by IL&FS. So I think that's a given, and I think just solving the IL&FS puzzle is not going to kind of unscramble the egg, so to speak. But having said that, I think whatever signals need to be made are really important at this time, because trust is kind of the glue of the financial sector. And if the credit markets have started freezing, I think that's a very, very ominous sound which is coming to the markets, and the government is rightly tackling it with speed and alacrity. So I think we are on the right path, but again, let's not expect the patient to start running the marathon after the CPR.
Okay. Mr. Hari Bhakti, let me ask you, another criticism that's come the new board's way is the fact that it mostly comprises of babus. How effective is the new board going to be, to your mind, in this rescue act that we're trying to pull off?
In my view, we should not prejudge the competency of this board. They are extremely senior, seasoned professionals with a very competent leader in Uday Kotak. So I think we should see the way in which they go about the task of execution. My own feeling is that together, given the fact that this is a nationally important task that they have been assigned, there will be enough good wisdom prevailing amidst this board, and I suspect that we will have outcomes which will surprise all of us. I'm actually pretty confident that they'll be able to turn the situation around rather rapidly.
Well, let's not prejudge the board, but Mr. Roy, here is somebody who we are judging, and those are the former directors of IL&FS, whether, it's R.C. Bhargav, Jerry Rao, they continue to occupy board seats in other companies. Do you think it's tenable given that they're ruled unfit to be on the IL&FS board?
I'll just step back for a minute and give you my views on what the current board which has been appointed, and then go on to this question. Uday, of course, is probably the best thing which could have happened. There is no question about that. He has the right skills. But you must understand that this board, unlike that last board, has executive responsibilities. It's almost like appointing executive directors to the board. It is not going to be ornamental directors like the board of the yesteryears, right? So that is the thing, because to unravel this IL&FS mess, you have to act on various counts and act rapidly with a management team which you have to appoint. So to that extent, I would think, of course, the board being as it is, it needs to be expanded with certain more skill sets. And the three skill sets which I think are very necessary are for an accounting professional, and for somebody with a background in law, and third, with most importantly, as well, with background in infrastructure domain. These are three things which are required. You see, we have a lot of IS officers and senior people who have a lot of wisdom to bring to the table by all means, but we also need executive capacity. So that is the limited point I'm making. Now, using this, as far as the last board is concerned, obviously, most boards in India, including this, and we have written about this significantly, people have talked about it. It's really an ornamental fixture which is there in corporate India, apart from very few boards which are very, very sort of effective. And that is the bane of the problem. And the bane of the problem is precisely that. Here you have a CEO, and we have had many instances of this nature, who was of a demigod status, who just couldn't be questioned. So the board just came and they were basically sleeping at the wheel, to the extent that even risk management, which is the basic thing in any financial services company, was not done, right? So to that extent, now I can't comment on whether Mr. Bhargav or Jerry Rao should or should not be in other boards.
Yeah.
But the fact of the matter is, this board in a collective way has failed. I mean, that is very obvious.
Right.
So
Sandeep, let me ask you the same question
what
then.
the law says, etc.
Yeah. Sandeep Parekh, let me ask you that question then. Will the Companies Act be put to the test, you think, as far as the fate of some of these former directors go? Because look, the charges are grave. I mean, you had the Economic Affairs Secretary saying that the government believes they failed to discharge their fiduciary duties.
So, I don't know, I'd not like to prejudge either the capacity of the erstwhile directors in kind of running the company aground,
Okay.
or of the new directors. I think what is required in running a company is very different from kind of putting the house which has been on fire, dousing those fires. So the I think people are kind of being too critical because bureaucrats have been appointed, but I think bureaucrats are a good choice when the house is on fire because they know how to protect the asset. They may not be great at running a constructive company, but they are really excellent at managing crises. So I think my guess would be they'd be reasonably good in salvaging the situation. And as I said, they need to look at both solvency and they need to look at liquidity, which is managing the cash flows, and whether it's equity inflows or whether it's haircuts by banks or some other kind of restructuring or sale of assets, and probably a combination of all of the above. All of that will probably need to follow.
Right. Sriram, let me ask you that because it seems to me like the rest of the panel is being very charitable. You're a sort of straight shooter. Do you believe that former board members, some very tall stalwarts nonetheless of corporate India, need to be held equally responsible?
Well, if you look at the IL&FS issue and how it has been panning out over the last 3-4 years, you would realize that this crisis didn't really burst upon the market and the country very suddenly. This crisis has been building up for quite some time now, at least 3, 4, 5 years. We all know that some of the subsidiaries of IL&FS have been going through problems, especially the listed ones like ITNL. ITNL's share price has gone from 250 rupees odd in about 2013-14 to about 30 rupees now. Their debt has more than doubled from about 12,000-13,000 odd crore to about 30,000 crore now. So none of these problems, I mean, I'm just giving a bit of figures out here. There are a whole lot of data which shows that this IL&FS problem has been building up for quite some time, and everybody, the management personnel, the board members, the credit rating agencies, none of them appear to have really bothered with the fact that there is a real crisis at hand. I mean, how is it that the credit rating agencies really woke up only last month and realized that this company was not solvent and that they had to downgrade the debt from A to D? And how is it that the shareholders never realized and never asked any questions? And here, I would like to actually make this point that the two largest shareholders, LIC and Oryx Corporation, they hold more than 20% of the company, 23 and 25 odd percent. I mean, didn't they realize that this company was going through a whole lot of problems? Didn't they realize that the crisis was building up? You had nothing going for the company. Revenues were not growing. Your interest rates, your interest costs were ballooning. Your debt servicing obligations was ballooning. Your profits were falling. Projects were getting stalled. Yeah. There was no payment received from the government, or no attempt at reviving any of the projects that got stalled for various reasons. I mean, I'm not blaming anybody here, but for various reasons the projects were not starting, and nobody realized that there was a problem. I mean, nobody asked tough questions. I don't expect LIC or Oryx to act like activist hedge funds in the United States. But come on, you got to ask these questions.
Okay. Yes.
You are trying to bolt the barn door after the horses have gone.
Well, let's actually pose that question then to Mr.
I don't know how this can be possible in 21st century India.
Yeah, Mr. Haribhakti, let's actually take off from where Sriram's left. What about the role of LIC? It owns more than 25% stake in IL&FS. While on one hand it's scuttled, a possible deal with Piramal, on the other hand it's left the company fending for itself by not providing the liquidity and fund support.
Well, I think a lot of people will have to take responsibility, but today we need to focus on what needs to be done to get the company out of this really difficult situation it finds itself in. So I think all the suggestions made on this panel will have to pan out, and pan out very positively for IL&FS. I feel that the focus of all attention should now be on what ought to be done to bring value back from the receivables of the government, sale of the assets, making sure that the first thing they should do is to make sure that the risk management committee gets activated and starts operating immediately. Board engagement of the highest level, engagement of the shareholders has to be there. There has to be support. The entire system and every player who is involved in the process will have to now give their shoulder to make sure that this problem gets resolved. Government has shown its hand. The regulator, in terms of the MCA, has taken the bold step of going and making sure that the board is fully recast. And we now need to make sure that all the best that can come from the collective wisdom of this board and the 4 other members. Let's not forget that the intention is to appoint 10 board members and 4 more will come on board. So my sense is that this is going to be revived pretty much in the same way and with the same efficiency as we saw the revival of Satyam transforming into Tech Mahindra.
Okay. Sandeep Parekh, let me ask you then, the same question. Can the government and the new board's role just end at resolution? What about accountability? And I'm going to come back to LIC. Only last week you had the LIC chairman telling our cameras that the insurer will do all it takes to keep IL&FS afloat. Today you see the board is being superseded with the government in the driver's seat. Doesn't it raise serious questions about the role of LIC?
Actually, legally speaking, not.
Okay.
Because LIC is a shareholder, and even though they have one director who is a nominee director on the board of IL&FS, you can never, as a matter of law, you cannot hold a shareholder responsible for what is going wrong in a company. So they'll have to look at the board collectively, including the independent directors, and that would obviously include the nominee director of LIC. But otherwise, I don't think there's a kind of moral or legal obligation of a shareholder to keep pumping in more money. In fact, there is a moral hazard. But I think given the size of IL&FS, I think the government has done the right thing by stepping in, because as I said, the problem has become 20 times the size of IL&FS, and the entire financial sector has been bitten with this contagion. So I think action needs to be taken and trust has to be restored by the government, and I think that's exactly what they're doing by stemming the rot at the source of the problem, which is IL&FS. And postmortems have a certainty which surgeries don't have. So we will have certainty as to the fault, but if you notice, the Satyam litigation is still going on 10 years later. So the postmortem is going to take a very long time, even though it may be very certain. So let's not wait for the postmortem. Let's kind of focus on on the issue at hand, which is reviving the Indian financial market first of all, and secondarily reviving or kind of salvaging what is left of IL&FS.
Sriram, I have time for one last question, and I'm going to pose that to you. In the case of Satyam, the government's proactive action helped stem the rot with the Mahindras coming on board. Can we expect the government intervention to be as effective in the case of IL&FS? What's your assessment?
Okay, that's going to depend on a number of factors. One, the comparison of Satyam is you can do that only up to an extent, and beyond that, I don't think the comparison is really valid. For one big reason, Satyam was a software services company, and the problem with the company was that the managing director and the promoter one day got up and said that, look, I have inflated the profits, the numbers are not accurate, and I'm riding a tiger, and I need to kind of get out. So the problem with Satyam didn't really extend to the entire software services sector or didn't affect financial markets in the way that IL&FS has had. So and the problem with Satyam got solved, if I'm not mistaken, in about 3 or 4 months. The problem came up in January, and I think by April, May, it was done and Tech Mahindra had taken over. IL&FS is going to take a long time. I'm not saying it's not going to be solved. I'm not saying that the government or the new board led by Mr. Uday Kotak is not going to be successful, but it's going to take a real long time because there are a lot of complex issues involved. And they have said that out of 25 assets that they have put up for sale, 14 of them they have found buyers or they have agreed on buyers, but we don't know the identity of the buyers. Yeah. And even if we know the identity of the buyers, we don't know, I don't know whether they have done any due diligence or not, and whether they have found any more holes, any more problems there which they may want to solve. So there are a lot of issues. I mean, you're talking about huge number of assets, disparate assets, wind energy, water pipelines, water systems, power sector, power plants, roads. All this is going to go not to one buyer, it's going to go to different buyers if at all they decide to sell a lot of the assets, which I'm sure they'll have to do that. I don't see a way out here. So it's going to be complex, it's going to be long drawn. I would think at least a year, maybe more, for the buyers to come forward and sign deals and actually ensure that the agreements are completed. Not just sign a term sheet, but also ensure that the agreements were completed and the assets actually change hands. So this is going to be a problem that is going to stay with us. Maybe the financial market panic may subside in some time. Maybe the confidence will get restored. The more important thing that the board needs to do, and this is what we need to watch out over the next 1 month, is that are they going to go out and signal a big confidence boosting measure by saying that, okay, here are a few assets and we have found buyers for them. Sure. If they do that in the next 1 month or maybe 1.5 months, it will be a big confidence boost. It will also mean that the shareholders will come in and say, okay, we can give you the money now that we have seen you actually going out and doing some work. If these two things happen by the end of this year, and I'm just giving a little bit of an elaborate timeline here, by the end of this year, by the end of December, I think we would have crossed a very big hurdle. But the entire process to unravel and settle, probably a year and more.
All right. Gentlemen, I'm afraid we've completely run out of time on this leg of the India development debate. But nonetheless, thank you, each one of you, for taking the time out. Mr. Haribhakti, Sandeep Parekh, Mr. Prabal Basu Roy, and our colleague from the Economic Times, Shri.